Hello and welcome to the Crane April Research Forum. Thank you for joining us today. We're so glad that you're here. I'm Dr. Rebecca Dorr, and I'm the Director of Research here at the Crane Center for Early Childhood Research and Policy. My colleague Kathy is going to be monitoring our chat box today, and we'll be adding housekeeping items there. These monthly forums feature research on emerging or key topics that impact the field of early childcare and education. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Ashli-Ann Douglas. Dr. Douglas is a research associate with the mathematics education team at WestEd, a nonpartisan research development and service agency that works to increase opportunities for children, youth, and adults through learning improvements. Dr. Douglas has extensive quantitative and qualitative research experience, and her work focuses on improving mathematics learning outcomes for students ranging from preschoolers all the way through to adults. Specific areas of interest for her include early childhood education, family math engagement, student math mindsets, and culturally responsive sustaining learning opportunities. Dr. Douglas has experience implementing math supports in both home-based and school-based settings, studying the math experiences of racially and economically marginalized K-12 students. Currently, she also serves as co-facilitator of NACCE's Early Math Interest Forum. Today, Dr. Douglas will discuss recent research on Black families' experiences with and preferences for early math support for their children, and how these findings can inform preschool programs to better support the math development of Black preschoolers and improve their partnerships with families. I'm very much looking forward to this discussion, and with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Douglas.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about high quality math learning and family engagement. I would love for us to get to know each other a little bit, even though we're not in the same room together. And so I have a few polls sprinkled throughout our time together today. So stay tuned for that. And I definitely love for you to engage with me. You've already learned a bit about me, but here's a little bit more. I hold a PhD in developmental psychology from Vanderbilt University. I also studied elementary education as a part of a teacher licensing program. I am currently a math education researcher at WestEd, where I evaluate educational products like curriculum, and I also develop and facilitate professional learning for teachers and school staff and districts and the works. At the bottom of the screen are two of my recently published research papers that are related to our talk together today. And I'll bring these up a little bit later as well. So I'd love to hear from you. What are you hoping to learn or gain from this session? And you can join this poll. It'll be the same way throughout the session by going to the website pollev.com/adouglas230 or by texting adouglas230 to the number on the screen or by scanning the QR code in the corner here. And then Kathy is also putting in another way that you can join in the chat. So what are you hoping to learn or gain? And we have some responses coming in. Thanks so much for starting to engage. And so I'm seeing some around just hearing what the data is, some around how to support children's early math skills, how to engage with families around early math, and how to do all this in addition to whatever math curriculum you're using. And then it sounds like we might even have some parents on the call. That's super exciting to hear. All right, we're slowing down. We do have about 10 seconds left. So if you're typing, go ahead and hit send really quickly. Awesome. All right. So here are the objectives that I thought about as I was preparing to talk with you today. Hopefully you see some alignment between what you're hoping to gain and what I'm hoping to provide. So the first objective is to explore examples of developmentally appropriate practice in early childhood mathematics teaching and learning based on Black parents' perspectives and lived experiences. And the second is to learn some of the resources that Black families desire to support their preschool-age children's math learning at home and in their communities. I'll be touching on some of the resources that's out there, evidence-based resources around family engagement as well towards the end of the session. So onto another poll. I started making some inferences based on what you're hoping to get from this session, but what is your role? Again, it's the same ways to join the poll. If you are texting, you just text the letter that corresponds with your answer. All right, we saw lots of movement there, and we see a pretty good spread, with the bulk being in the PD facilitator coach role. And then where are you calling in from? What state do you work in? I'm calling in from Ohio, but I do work across the country, focused on early math and really on mathematics more broadly. All righty, and then our last poll for now. I'd love for you to think about your earliest memory of learning or doing math and to share one word that comes to mind about your experience. And so that could be an emotion, it could be the person you were with or what you were doing. What's one word that comes to mind about your earliest memory of learning or doing math? And we have under 10 seconds left. So again, if you are wanting to participate, go ahead and get this in. I don't know about you, but I absolutely love word clouds. I love seeing the movement, but also the quick sort of visual representation of where we are. And so what I'm seeing here is engaging as a key thing, early memory of learning math being engaging and fun, and there being games. Then we do have some folks who felt like math was confusing or challenging, and they felt stressed and frustrated. All right. And this probably touches on the how you were being taught math, as well as the mindsets that you're developing. Let's keep going. All right, so now that we know who's in the room, let's make sure we're on the same page as far as what we mean by early math and by developmentally appropriate practice. So mathematics is a key part of kindergarten readiness. Children start kindergarten with varying levels of math skills, and these math skills before the start of kindergarten influence their later academic achievement. It also influences outcomes in adulthood. For instance, Ritchie and Bates found that children's math skills early on were really strong predictors of their socioeconomic status, their income in adulthood, even after controlling for their family's SES when they were children. So math being really, really important. And then at the bottom of the screen, I pulled some graphs from Ohio's kindergarten readiness statistics. So next, I'm wanting to share with you two quotes about early math. It's from a report called Reframing Early Math, and they talk about math as a language and math as a lens. And I think these are really great for teachers or even PD facilitators to think about how to communicate what math is and why it's important in these early years. I also think this is a great way to talk with families around about math. And the Reframing Early Math report was based on a study in which folks at Frameworks Institute tested out different ways of talking about math. And they found that these two were key ways that helped people to really get excited about math and get on board. So the first is math is a language, and it says it's a form of communication with its own words, symbols, and grammar that people use to express their thoughts and ideas to one another. Just like language, all people are born with the capacity to learn math, but as with any language, the later that people begin hearing, seeing, and using the language of math, the more challenging it is to become completely fluent. That's why it's so important that kids begin learning math from birth. And then the second piece is math is a lens. And they say learning math is like learning to use a special lens that allows people to see and understand the world in a new and different way. Just like adjusting to a new set of eyeglasses or using a telescope, the less often children view things through a math lens, the more challenging it is for them to see the world through it. That's why it's so important for kids to begin learning math from birth. Adults can help children see the world through a math lens by showing them how to use math to interpret everyday life. And the quote continues in the report with a variety of examples of how adults can help children use, put on, and adjust their math lens. One of my favorite examples that is actually not in the report is the realization that traffic lights use a repeating pattern. They go red, yellow, green, red, yellow, green, and they repeat in the same way again and again. So a good way to put on your math lens to spot mathematics in the world around you. All right, so I've pulled from the National Association for the Education of Young Children, NAEYC, on their guidelines for developmentally appropriate practice. And so on the left, you'll see 6 guidelines that they've put out. They have plenty of details about each of these on their website. And I want to highlight in this quote that they argue that developmentally appropriate practice is focused on promoting every child's optimal development and learning. And so that requires thinking about the individual child, where they are as far as their math skills, and how to help them to get to the next level. And hopefully you'll see these popping up as we dive into the data. So the study that I'll spend the most of our time talking about was done with a group of Black caregivers. Most of them were mothers. We had a few grandmothers and fathers. They were, most of them, all except for one, was a part of a larger study, and I'll talk about the larger study in a little bit. But for this one, we pulled out this small subset of Black parents, and we asked them to do an interview with us to really get a more nuanced understanding of how they view math, how they approach math, that we can't quite get when we do larger scale surveys and things like that. They were talking about their daughters or sons about 50-50. And similarly, there was a variety of education levels and income levels. So about half did not have a college degree, and about half had a college degree. And then about half had earned less than $45,000 as their household income. So what did we learn about Black parents' perspectives about their children's math learning in preschool? Firstly, all of the parents reported that it was important for their child to be learning math in their preschool programs. Here is a quote from one parent. I'll pause so that you can read this and to take note of what stands out to you from this quote. So here are some of the things that jumped out to me. I noticed that this parent was thinking long term. They were asked whether it was important for their preschool age child to be learning math in school, and they started talking about when it gets to high school, where the work gets too hard. The bottom piece that I highlight here, she says, I don't want them to fall behind. And this was really interesting to me because it's very aligned with the research, some of the research that I highlighted before about the importance of early math skills and how that sets you up on a trajectory for academic success in not just math, but also reading and science. There's really rich research establishing that. The other piece that I really loved, this might be my second favorite quote from the entire study, is she says, education is important, but most important, math. And this made me think of and want to ask, to what extent is that the reality for you? Whether it's in your classroom or in the policies that you are implementing, the professional development that you're choosing for your teachers, or the ways in which you're preparing teachers, pre-service teachers to get into the classroom. To what extent is math an emphasis for you? How are you aligning with this? A recent study found that preschool children only spend 5% of their classroom time on math activities, while they spend 45% of their time on literacy on average. And this study, I think, did a really good job of looking comprehensively. They looked at while children were playing and to see whether there was math talk, to see whether teachers were going up and suggesting, there's a pattern in your Lego block building? Or could you make a repeating pattern? Or could you count how many green blocks and how many red blocks? Which one is more? What are the ways in which they're weaving in math instruction, as well as they looked for direct, explicit, let's practice counting today. And so this is not exciting for me to see 5% of their classroom time. And there has been other studies previously that have found similar things. The next thing that I want to highlight is that parents mentioned a variety of numeracy, patterning, and geometry skills when asked what they view as math that preschoolers can learn. So they were not just talking about counting, which is what previous research shows that parents tend to just focus on counting when they're working with their preschoolers. So here you can see the skills that they mentioned and what percentage of parents mentioned these skills. So counting was the most popular. Almost all of the parents talked about counting and cardinality. So understanding how many and being able to give 6 things if I ask for 6 things. Next up, they talked about arithmetic a lot, as well as patterning. Most often this was repeating patterns. It was really interesting to me that a couple of parents mentioned fractions, and they talked about using fraction terms with their children, like saying, I want a quarter of this thing. And that makes me think of, the math is a language and children hearing different math terms and things like that. Let's look now at children's experiences learning math in their preschool program. I found that some parents shared concerns with the rigor of math instruction that their children were receiving in their early childhood programs, as well as with their child's relationship with their teacher. So here's a quote from a parent. I'll pause so you can read this and also think about the questions that I have for you at the bottom of the screen. So the first is, what concerns and challenges are raised by the parent? And if you were this child's teacher, what strategies would you take to support her? So again, highlighting some pieces of the quote here. This parent said, I don't have issues with her learning part. She knows the math. And she also said that she switched her child's school because of her concerns. One being that her child was not being challenged mathematically. She was finishing the math quickly and getting in trouble as a result. And the second piece I found quite disheartening, where this child was really internalizing the discipline that she was receiving around not being sure or having to reiterate to herself that she is indeed a good child, even though she's getting in trouble because she's trying to help her classmates. And so in thinking about how to support this child, I think about how we can value and foster children's agency and brilliance. And I think about the NACE quote about their optimal development and learning. And Things like individualizing, maybe her teacher could be giving her more challenging work, or maybe she could get some opportunities to explain her thinking and to help others. How are we fostering and valuing children's agency and brilliance and their optimal math learning from a strength-based perspective? Here's another quote from a different parent who said, they need to have have a safe place to try things. And so that's partially why we chose the school that we chose. I don't know how much my daughter is initiating math, but it is important because I want them to understand it's a part of life. I don't want them to be scared of it or avoid it like me. And so this parent was actually doing the interview about her son, who's in preschool. However, she has an older daughter who goes to the same school. And in the interview, she talks about the fact that her son really likes math and he has number related things on his bedroom wall. And he's just excited to talk about math. And then she talked about her daughter who's not so much into math and the fact that she chose the school based on the value she places on her child feeling safe and comfortable and willing to explore, because learning is a vulnerable thing, right? Especially as it relates to sharing out what you're thinking and whether you got the right answer and all that. But then she raises this small concern of, I don't know if my daughter is bringing up math, and I'm not sure if her school is prompting her to do math. So some questions for you to reflect on. What does math learning look and feel like in your class or at home for any parents that are on here? Who participates and who does not? Are there students who are particularly disruptive during math? How do you create a safe, supportive space in your classroom for all students to feel safe and willing to engage? We saw engaging as a key early memory earlier on. So we've talked about some examples of developmentally appropriate practice in early childhood math teaching and learning. And based on this study, rigorous supportive instruction in early childhood math requires intentional time. And it also requires individualized, strength-based instruction. Secondly, it requires teachers who have high expectations for all children and are working towards, again, pushing children along to develop more skills or a deeper version of skills. And maybe Latoya, the example before, maybe she was counting from 1 to 10 really quickly, or writing down, drawing two things when asked for two, and her teacher having high expectations for her could then move her on to, well, let's practice counting from 1 to 20 or something like that. Or let's practice some simple arithmetic. And then it also requires teachers who value, learn from, and support families. Let's talk about parents' desired resources. Before we do that, I have two more polls, I believe it is, for you. So the first, how do you feel about engaging or partnering with families to support children's math learning? Again, if you're texting, you can just text the letter that corresponds. So we saw a pretty big change near the end there. And I wonder if how we would have changed if we had more time. But we're seeing mostly good, and that is exciting. All right, how what resources do you think families desire to support their children's math learning at home and in their communities? This is an open-ended, so you just type in a word or a short phrase. We see maybe they need some modeling, some examples of how to do this, maybe some tech resources, maybe some information about current math standards and how to interpret those and how to support those. And maybe they have the resources, but they just need ways to use them. All right. Thanks so much for engaging with me there. So here's a quote from a parent. And this time I've got the spoiler on the screen. This parent was talking about needing materials. And some of the things that I noticed with this parent is she knew exactly what math skills her child was learning in school. And she also knew how her teacher, her child's teacher, was teaching these math skills. This quote is actually from Latoya's parent and about the new school that she's in. So in school right now, this is what they're learning, and they're thinking about written numerals and about cardinality, and so she's having to draw 8 cats if she sees the numeral 8, or is told that she should write 8 cats using the number word. And then the other thing that I noticed is this parent wanted to closely align how she was supporting and extending her child's math learning at home with what was going on in the classroom. Here's another parent who wanted materials, and she said that she would ask her child's teacher to send home books or other things to do summer teaching, but they never sent her any materials, and she felt like she was lacking. There is research showing that children experience learning loss over the summer, and that's especially true with mathematics. And so because they're not continuing to use the math lens, they might forget how to adjust the lens, right? Or forget the rules in the grammar if we use the math language, or forget the vocab term. And so this parent wanted to continue supporting her child's math learning, but felt like she wasn't getting the resource needed. Here's another quote from a different parent who said, "We gained several manipulatives from her being at this school. And so sometimes we'll just pull those out while I'm cooking and I'm sort of busy, but I want to be monitoring my child. I want to be engaging with her. And so she'll pull out manipulatives and we'll talk about the math as she is using the manipulatives." So this parent was asked, all of the parents were asked what activities their child really likes, that they would be able to incorporate math into. And this parent brought up the fact that as a family, they go out and see movies. And so she started trying to think of ways she could incorporate math into that experience. A pretty tough context. A lot of parents brought up, we love going to the playground. And so we can count steps, or we can count while he runs around the playground, and we can see how fast it was. And if he can that time with a smaller number, but this parent tried to do this with movies, which I loved. I loved the challenge. And she said, one way I think I can further help him evolve in his learning of math when it comes to adding and subtracting is with the movie tickets. But I think he's a little bit young for that, but you never know. And so I concluded based on this that this parent could use some information about developmentally appropriate math skills. Is her child too young? How do you know? How do you help support a child to get there? What skills could she be practicing? And there are lots of examples of things that they could do with the movie tickets as far as practicing and talking about math skills. There's another parent who said, I wasn't educated in early childhood education at all. And so recognizing what skills would be appropriate at her development level would be a great resource. Knowing what benchmarks might be as she does get older and recognizing what those would be, and then ideas to ensure that she hits those benchmarks. And so this parent was thinking about his daughter's current math skills, knowing what math skills she can be working on, knowing that as she's developing that she can start moving towards other skills and knowing how to support her in meeting these benchmarks and refining, honing, practicing new skills. At the bottom of the screen, I note two studies that I conducted with some colleagues, and we found that parents and teachers' knowledge about the variety of skills that young children can learn is related to how often they provide support for children's math development. So it's related to teachers' math instruction in the classroom, as well as how often parents were doing math with their child at home. All right, here's another parent, and this time I want to pose the question to you of how would you support this parent? So as you read this quote, think about that. So this parent said the resource she needed was time and energy. Here's the rest of the quote. For context, I asked about the resources they would like near the end of the study. And so this is after we talked about what they think math is. We talked about uh, whether they think learning math at home is important and at school is important, and how they currently practice math and how they could incorporate math into activities that they already do, whether it be daily routine activities or during their child's play. And so after this parent had the opportunity to think about math at home and in their community, she said, and I think too, it is a mindset as well. I'm making a bigger deal out of it. It could be a 5-minute thing. It really don't have to be that much time. I'm just like preparing myself for the rig and the row of it all, with it really might not even be all that. And then my absolute favorite quote from this study, so you got me thinking, Doc. And that is my favorite because that is all that I want for the families that I work with and for the teachers that I work with, is for them to be thinking about math and to be thinking about creative ways to help support children in improving their math skills. So this parent, I concluded, could use, although she asks for time, and energy, she could use some information about how to support math learning during play and during everyday routines. Here's another parent. This dad actually, when we asked how important it is for his child to be learning math at home, he said, Honestly, not really. I want her to have a childhood and to have fun. And it was clear that he didn't see math and fun as going together. But at the end of the study, he said, of the interview, he said, it's okay to do a little bit more deliberately as opposed to whenever it comes up. And it's okay to practice different skills as opposed to just counting, which is something that she's mastered. We can look for other ways to incorporate a bit more. So here, another example of information about how to support math learning during play and during everyday routines. This parent said in this quote, "You want to know if they're learning." And I concluded that information about ongoing math instruction in school is something that she would appreciate. She actually talked about her older son, knowing, seeing how he developed and then paying attention to her current preschooler, noticing what skills he would come home and be talking about. And she said, I noticed he wasn't learning the same things. And that was a concern to me. But she wanted to know, what they're learning and if they're actually developing these skills successfully. So on the left of the screen are the resources that these parents highlighted, materials, and then information about 3 key things. On the right, I have some questions for you. Which of these resources do you already provide to families? Or if you're a parent, which of these resonate with you? Which of these, maybe you now have a tool or a way of verbalizing to your child's teacher how they could help. Which of these resources do you want to start providing to families and why? And what ideas do you have for getting started? And when will you? What supports do you need to improve your family school partnerships around early math? So let's talk briefly about this other study that I mentioned. This is the larger study that these parents, most of these parents participated in. They participated in an intervention where they either got information about numeracy, these are the 4 numeracy skills that we focused on, or about patterning. And they received information via a brief session in which they got a definition of the skill, an example of the skill, a video. So someone mentioned modeling earlier, a video of a child attempting the skill. And then we asked them about how they could engage their child realistically with this skill. Then they got some follow-up text messages, including a definition and 2 tips for at home. And we found that after the intervention, parents who received information about numeracy had more accurate knowledge about the variety of early numeracy skills that children can be learning. And this was very much tied to their age, so thinking about developmentally appropriate. They were observed talking about and practicing complex numeracy skills more often, reported doing activities focused on the more complex numeracy skills more often, and reported that the information was helpful and relevant to their child. And we found similar things for parents who got information about repeating patterns. In fact, our largest effect size was with parents who got information about repeating patterns. Here are some quotes from parents who did the interview when I asked them to think back to the intervention and whether it was indeed helpful. One parent said, "I never thought about patterns before I did that study." Another said, "It reinforced for me that I'm on the right path." And this final parent here talks about how the intervention helped them to be creative in thinking about weaving math into their daily lives, sprinkling it in here and there, and keeping it fun. All right. So again, here are the guidelines from NACI for developmentally appropriate practice. This QR code will take you to the details that they provide, the tips and things for developing reciprocal partnerships with families. And with that, I want to thank you again for joining me today. My contact information is on the screen, and there's a QR code here for a brief that a colleague and I recently wrote around the state of early math and how SDED can help. Here's another QR code to a brief survey where I'd love for you to share some feedback with me. And while you do that, we'll get ready for some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Douglas. Audience, we are going to start the question and answer session. So please add any questions that you have or comments for Dr. Douglas in the question and answer box. I'll get started off, kick us off with a question of my own while folks are responding. Can you talk a little bit more, give us some tips and ideas from the research that you've done about how early childhood educators can work on sort of incorporating these more culturally responsive math practices that really reflect the strengths and the values that Black families are bringing in?
Yeah, definitely. I think a key part of culturally relevant math instruction is learning where students are and then being strength-based. And so that's a key part, whether it's observing when
Mhm.
they're during their centers and seeing, oh, actually they did not count very accurately. And so now I know that later on I'm going to work with this child to make sure that they get some more practice. So really taking an individual child perspective, and seeing, or if you notice that this child was just knocking it out of the park with a certain skill, then thinking about how to build on that. That's really a key part of culturally responsive instruction. Another key part of that, which I mentioned a bit earlier, is learning from families. And so perhaps you talk with families around you talk with families and they say, this is how we do math. And I noticed that when we do it this way, she just lights up and she wants to keep going forever. And you might think about whether there is an opportunity for you to practice math in a similar way in class. So maybe it's he has a fireman costume, and whenever he puts that on, he is counting imaginary sprays of the hose, and you have a dress-up center in your classroom, and so you could bring in a fireman costume or something like that. But I think a key part is just making time to talk with parents, not just about what you want to share with them, but about their experiences, their needs, and then working on addressing those.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you. We have two questions coming in the chat that I think are actually go together pretty well. Can you share more key practices teachers can implement for building parents or caregiver efficacy for supporting their child's math learning? And then do you have suggestions on how to help parents sort of change their mindsets about how math is taught today?
Great questions. Let's see. The first one around parent caregiver efficacy. Well, one piece is, some parents might have good efficacy, right? But so there's that piece. But I do think lots of parents could benefit um, from supports, specifically in this way. And so one study that I heard of that I don't actually know if it's been published yet, they were inviting parents to stick around after they dropped off their kiddos, and they put out different activities that they thought would encourage some math talk and math play. And it was just free open. A parent could stay and work with their child, or they could grab a book and they could be reading and whatnot. And I think that's a cool way of helping parents see that they can be practicing math, right? And then maybe you go around and you talk about one, you could notice that parents aren't doing any math and say, hey, have you thought about pointing out the number of apples in the book and counting those? That's a really important way. I think part of it is just letting parents know that it's easy. You
Mhm.
know, they already, for the most, they already have these math skills when we're thinking about preschoolers. And so it's just emphasizing math talk and the fact that they are equipped, and of course that you're willing to support if they find that, maybe one thing is a little confusing or whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other piece of that question, the second question was about how to help parents change their mindset specifically about how math is taught today, which might be very different from how they were taught math when they were children, right? So do you have suggestions for how to help parents with that sort of mindset switch?
Yeah, I definitely, and that came up some in the interviews where parents say, yeah, this is not how I did it back in the day, or even how I did it when my child was a little younger.
Mm.
And so, and for instance, that parent who talked about, as they're counting, her teacher wants her to touch each object. And, that isn't something that she did before. Um, I think just these conversations, again, with parents, um, the intervention study that I shared, we started off with math. Math is important, and you play a key role
Mhm.
in supporting your child's math skills. And we looked at whether that changed parents' beliefs about math, and it did. And so that's my key takeaway is the small things. Again, this was a 15-minute conversation and some text messages across 2 weeks. They got, I think, a total of 6 text messages. Um, yeah, you can
Great.
count the words in a sentence is a great example
Yeah, I
here.
like that. Great. Um, so sort of zooming out a little bit from the families and the classrooms, I wonder if you could talk about any implications you think your research has for how policymakers could use some of these findings to design more equitable early math initiatives at a sort of a broader level.
Yeah, definitely. Great question. Literacy has always and probably will always get a whole lot of attention, and literacy is absolutely important. We love that. Um, I was noticing, for instance, Ohio putting out some new policies around literacy.
Mhm.
And so we need similar things, thinking about high quality materials and high quality materials for math that teachers will actually use as one piece. And so for Ohio has, these rules and guidelines around what materials, what curriculum can be used. So similar thing for math would be lovely. And then thinking about PD that can be provided for teachers to build their efficacy and their awareness of, you know, okay, I have the curriculum. How else can I be supporting math, or how can I engage children with the curriculum?
Oh, great, thank you. We had a question come in the chat for the Latanya example. What would you think about acceleration to a higher grade for math? So, moving her up a grade if she's not being challenged where she is. Do you have thoughts on that from a math learning perspective?
Yeah. Um, yes, maybe is what I'd say. It would be great. One of the NACE guidelines is around assessment. And so it'd be great to see if the teacher has some sort of assessment around math that she could provide to Latoya, some assessment for gifted education or whatnot, um, to then have some data to back that up. And I think also I I strongly advocate for individualized support in class, and thinking about, it's not just moving on to a different math skill, but it could be, okay, she knows how to count from 1 to 100. Does she know how to count by twos? And so she could be practicing
Mhm.
a different form of counting, a more complex form of counting, while the other kiddos are practicing counting by one or something like that. But definitely, I think letting parents know that they have that option too of going on to another grade or thinking about gifted and helping them through the process of weighing the pros and cons of that is really important. It's a great question.
Great, thank you. Well, can you tell us give us maybe a little bit of a preview, or tell us what research you're doing now or coming up, or what additional research you think is really needed to deepen our understanding of Black families' experiences with early math education?
Yeah, right now I'm digging even deeper into these interviews. We also ask parents about their memories of learning math
Mm,
as children, their own beliefs around math. And so that's one area that we're exploring right now. I would actually love to do some more early math research. My current role, I am evaluating PD for elementary teachers. I'm evaluating a math course for adults for trying to get their GED, but not a lot about early math. And so I'd love opportunities to collaborate. I'm also doing PD for schools as school districts or programs as they reach out. And sometimes it's we need help with setting up our centers or figuring out math discourse and what it looks like to really ask kids good math questions that keep them engaged. And sometimes it's we're struggling with math, or teachers don't feel confident, we don't know what we need, can you help us figure that out? So that's one piece that I'm really enjoying too, is the developing PD for teachers in the preschool space.
great. Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful presentation and conversation. Thank you again for sharing your research with us, Dr. Douglas.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. When you leave the meeting, a very short survey will pop up. Please do fill that out if you're able to. We really do value your feedback and we use it to inform our future events. Thank you again for joining us and have a great day.